You ever walk into a room thinking you've healed, only to find out the wound just learned how to sit still? Let me tell you something. Nobody at that party was ready for what happened that night. Not the caterer with the crab cakes, not the jazz band in the corner playing soft grown folks music, not even the man who thought he had everything under control. Especially not him, because when Malcolm Reed stepped into that ballroom with his brand new wife on his arm, tailored tux, polished smile, ego pressed sharper than his collar, he believed the past was buried. But the past wasn't buried. The past was standing across the room in a black silk dress, glowing. And 5 minutes later, a billionaire would lean down and kiss her, and Malcolm would freeze like somebody unplugged his soul.
I feel like this story will truly touch a woman's heart. It might feel very similar to your own story. Listen till the end, then tell me in the comments, were you right or was your partner wrong? If you enjoy real-life stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. Now, without wasting any time, let's start the story.
Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, because, oh, we will, let's rewind. Because stories like this, they don't start at the kiss. They start with silence. Malcolm didn't always wear arrogance like cologne. Back then, he wore ambition. And if you've ever loved a man with ambition but no emotional vocabulary, you already know where this is going. Her name was Imani Brooks. Imani had the kind of presence that didn't beg for attention, it commanded respect quietly. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, she didn't need to be. She had that grounded energy, the kind your grandmother would say, "That's a good woman right there." And Malcolm knew it. He met her at a community fundraiser in Atlanta. She was organizing scholarships for underprivileged black girls interested in STEM. He was fresh out of business school with startup dreams and a head full of numbers. They locked eyes over a folding table stacked with pledge cards. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever met somebody who felt like peace and potential at the same time? That was them. For a while. Imani believed in Malcolm before the investors did. She edited his pitch decks at midnight. She listened to his fears when the bank account dipped low. She reminded him who he was when rejection letters came heavy. And Malcolm? He built. His tech logistics company took off faster than either of them expected. Within 5 years, he wasn't just comfortable, he was powerful. And that's where the shift happened. Because some men grow with success, others outgrow gratitude. Now don't get quiet on me, we're just getting started. It wasn't cheating, it wasn't screaming matches, it was something worse: neglect. You see, neglect doesn't slam doors, it leaves them open and walks away. Malcolm started traveling more. Meetings ran longer, calls went unanswered, texts came back short. Busy. Later. Can this wait? Imani told herself it was temporary, that sacrifice now meant stability later. But later never came. Birthdays passed half-celebrated, anniversaries became calendar reminders instead of moments, conversations turned transactional. How was your day? Fine. You good? Yeah. And if you've ever been in a marriage where fine really means I'm fading, you know how loud that silence can be. One night, Imani tried to talk. Not argue. Talk. She sat across from Malcolm at the kitchen island, the same one they picked out together when money was tight, and said something he never forgot. "Do you still see me?" He didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to. And sometimes not knowing how to love someone properly still breaks them just the same. Instead of answering, he stood up, kissed her forehead like she was fragile glass, and said, "You worry too much." That was the beginning of the end. When Imani filed for divorce, people were shocked. Malcolm is a good man. He provides. He doesn't cheat. And here's a question for you. Since when did "he doesn't cheat" become the gold standard for love? Imani didn't leave because of another woman. She left because she became invisible. And invisibility will starve you slower than betrayal. But it starves you just the same. The divorce was clean. No dramatic courtroom scenes, no social media mudslinging, no public spectacle. Imani assumed she'd circle back. He thought time would cool her off. He underestimated her resolve. He also underestimated what happens when a woman stops begging to be seen. She starts building where she's valued. Now, here's where the story shifts, because while Malcolm doubled down on expansion, new offices, new investors, new magazine covers, Imani doubled down on herself. She went back to school, finished her doctorate in educational policy, expanded her nonprofit into 3 states, started consulting for private donors, and somewhere in that process, she stopped shrinking. Her confidence wasn't loud, it was rooted, and the world noticed, including someone Malcolm had only read about in financial magazines. But we'll get to him. Be patient. Good things take timing. 3 years after the divorce, Malcolm remarried. Her name was Danielle. Beautiful, polished, younger, and if we're being honest, and we are, she admired Malcolm in a way that fed his ego. She celebrated his accomplishments publicly. She praised him constantly. She didn't challenge him emotionally. It felt easy, but easy and deep are not the same thing. Their wedding was elegant, strategic, well-networked, and Malcolm believed he had successfully rewritten his narrative until the invitation arrived. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala. High profile, invite only, heavy hitters. Danielle was excited. "This is big, babe." Malcolm agreed. What he didn't know? Imani was on the host committee. Now here's where life gets poetic. Because the Sterling Foundation had recently partnered with a national education initiative, one spearheaded by Dr. Imani Brooks. He hadn't kept up with her work. He assumed she was still figuring things out. Funny how assumptions age badly. But Malcolm didn't know that yet. The ballroom shimmered, crystal chandeliers casting soft gold light, servers gliding across marble floors, black excellence draped in designer labels and generational wealth. Danielle held Malcolm's arm tightly. He scanned the room confidently, and then he saw her, across the room, laughing, radiant, not just surviving, thriving. That black silk dress fit like it was tailored by vindication itself. And for the first time in years, Malcolm felt something unfamiliar: regret. But wait, we're not at the kiss yet, because regret by itself, that's just a whisper. What happened next, that was thunder. Imani hadn't noticed him yet. She was mid-conversation with a tall, distinguished man with silver at his temples and power in his posture. People leaned in when he spoke. Donors hovered nearby, cameras subtly angled toward him. Danielle nudged Malcolm. "Isn't that Everett Langston?" Yes, that Everett Langston. Self-made billionaire, investor, philanthropist, one of the most influential black businessmen in the country. Malcolm straightened his jacket. Networking opportunity. That's what he told himself. But as he and Danielle approached, something inside him tightened. Because Everett wasn't just talking to Imani, he was listening to her deeply, intently, like her words carried weight. And when she laughed, he looked at her like she was the headline. Now let me ask you something. When was the last time Malcolm looked at her like that? Exactly. Imani turned. Their eyes met. Time didn't stop, but Malcolm did. She didn't look angry. She didn't look bitter. She looked free. And freedom hits different when you're the one who let it go. Danielle extended her hand politely. Dr. Brooks, right? I've heard so much about your work. Imani smiled warmly. And you must be Danielle. Congratulations on the wedding. Grace. Pure grace. Everett stepped forward. And you are? Malcolm Reed, he replied. Firm handshake. Recognition flickered in Everett's eyes. Oh, yes, of course. Not impressed. Aware. Subtle difference. They exchanged pleasantries, surface level, controlled, until the auction segment was announced. Everett leaned slightly toward Imani. Walk with me? She nodded. And that's when it happened. Not dramatic, not staged, just natural. He placed a gentle hand at her waist, leaned down, and kissed her. Slow, certain, claiming nothing, yet honoring everything. The room didn't gasp, but Malcolm's chest did. Danielle kept smiling, unaware of the war detonating beside her, because in that single moment, Malcolm understood something brutal. He had never kissed Imani like that in public. Not once. Not with pride, not with reverence. And now another man, a powerful man, did so without hesitation. Malcolm's fingers tightened around his champagne glass. The music kept playing, people kept mingling, but inside him, something cracked. And the worst part? Imani didn't look back. Now let me ask you something before we move another inch forward. Have you ever watched somebody else cherish what you once treated casually? That'll humble you faster than a sermon on Sunday morning. Because when Everett Langston kissed Imani, it wasn't just affection, it was acknowledgement. And Malcolm felt the difference in his bones. Danielle was still talking. We've been meaning to connect with the foundation for a while now. Her voice sounded distant to Malcolm, like it was underwater. He kept his eyes trained on Imani as she and Everett walked toward the stage area. She moved differently. Confident, grounded, unapologetic. There was no trace of the woman who once sat at a kitchen island asking, "Do you still see me?" This woman didn't need to ask. She knew she was seen. Now here's the thing about regret. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, then suddenly it's sitting heavy on your chest. Malcolm tried to swallow it down with champagne. Didn't work. He tried to distract himself by scanning the room. Didn't work. He even tried to lean in and whisper something charming to Danielle, but the words felt hollow because the image wouldn't leave his mind. That kiss, soft, certain, public, and the way Imani smiled afterward, not surprised, not shy, but secure. The MC tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sterling Foundation's annual gala. Applause filled the ballroom. Malcolm clapped mechanically. Everett was invited on stage to speak. Now, if you've ever heard a man speak who doesn't need to raise his voice to command attention, you understand the energy shift. Everett didn't brag. He didn't posture. He spoke about legacy, about building structures that outlive ego, about investing in women who invest in communities. And then he said something that hit Malcolm square in the ribs. Wealth without emotional intelligence is just expensive loneliness. The room murmured approval. Malcolm didn't, because that sentence felt personal. Now, maybe Everett didn't mean it that way, but when you're guilty, everything sounds like an accusation. Halfway through his speech, Everett extended his arm toward Imani. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Imani Brooks. Her policy work has restructured access to STEM education in underrepresented communities across 3 states. She is not only brilliant, she is relentless in her purpose. The spotlight found her. Applause rose. Not polite applause, proud applause. The kind that says, "We respect you." Malcolm felt heat crawl up his neck. When was the last time he publicly honored her like that? He used to introduce her as, "This is my wife, Imani." But Everett introduced her as, "This is Dr. Imani Brooks." Identity matters. And Malcolm realized something ugly. He had loved her role. Everett loved her essence. Now, Danielle wasn't oblivious. She followed Malcolm's gaze. She noticed how stiff his shoulders were. She leaned close and whispered, light but pointed, "You okay?" "Of course," he replied, too quickly, too sharp. She tilted her head. "You look like you swallowed a lemon." Now here's a little pattern interrupt for you. If your spouse ever asks if you're okay and you answer, "Of course," in that tone, you are not okay. Danielle wasn't foolish. She knew who Imani was. Of course she did. But knowing someone exists and witnessing their impact are two different experiences. And tonight, Imani wasn't an ex-wife. She was a force. After the speech, guests dispersed into smaller circles. Malcolm made a decision he would later question. He excused himself from Danielle. "I'm going to grab another drink." He wasn't. He was going to find closure, or at least that's what he told himself. Imani stood near a tall cocktail table reviewing something on her phone. Everett had stepped away briefly to greet another donor. This was Malcolm's window. He approached slowly. "Congratulations," he said. She looked up. There was no tension in her eyes, just composure. "Thank you." A beat passed, then another. And here's where pride wrestled with vulnerability. Malcolm cleared his throat. "I mean, you look well." Imani smiled slightly. "I am." Two words. Calm. Certain. No extra explanation offered. And for some reason, that unsettled him more than anger would have. He hesitated, then said it. "Are you happy?" Now, let's pause right there, because the audacity of that question, after years of emotional absence, after never answering hers. But here's the truth about regret. It makes you bold in all the wrong moments. Imani studied him carefully, not with bitterness, with clarity. "Very," she replied. No hesitation, no performance, just truth. Malcolm nodded slowly. "I'm glad." But his eyes betrayed him, and she noticed. She always noticed. "Malcolm," she said gently, "you don't have to look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I escaped something?" Silence. Because she had. But she wasn't going to weaponize it. He shifted. "I never meant to." She held up a hand. "We both did the best we could with who we were at the time." Now that's maturity. No blame, no accusation, just accountability. But maturity doesn't erase consequences. And before Malcolm could gather his thoughts, Everett returned. His presence changed the air. Grounded, protective. Not possessive, protective. He placed a subtle hand at Imani's lower back. "You ready for the panel?" She nodded, then looked back at Malcolm. "Take care of yourself." And just like that, conversation over. No dramatic exit, no lingering glance. She turned toward her future, and Malcolm stood facing his past. If the kiss was thunder, the panel was lightning, because this wasn't just about romance, it was about respect. Imani sat center stage between two influential policymakers and Everett. The moderator asked tough questions about funding disparities, legislative resistance, and systemic barriers. Imani answered without notes, without hesitation, data-backed, experience-informed, passionate, but measured. At one point, she said something that silenced the room. Too often, women, especially Black women, are expected to shrink their brilliance to protect fragile partnerships. I no longer believe in shrinking. The applause was immediate, and Malcolm felt that sentence like a verdict, because she had shrunk once, for him. Danielle finally spoke the question she'd been holding. Did you know she was like this? Malcolm didn't answer right away, because what could he say? Yes? No? He knew her potential, but he never nurtured it. And that difference mattered. She's always been smart, he said quietly. Danielle nodded slowly. But tonight she looks powerful. And there it was, the distinction he couldn't escape. Smart is potential. Powerful is realized. At the end of the night, major donors pledged live. Everett stepped forward. I'll match every dollar raised tonight up to $5 million. Gasps. Applause. And then he turned toward Imani again. For the work you lead. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't romantic. It was partnership. Public partnership. Malcolm clapped with everyone else. But inside, he felt something unravel. Because in his marriage to Imani, he had funded things, but he never funded her vision. He saw her nonprofit as a passion project. Everett saw it as legacy work. On the drive home, silence filled the car. Danielle stared out the window. Malcolm gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Finally, she spoke. You still love her? Now listen carefully. Because this moment right here, this is where truth either frees you or exposes you. Malcolm didn't answer immediately, and silence sometimes answers louder than words. Danielle inhaled slowly. I deserve honesty. He swallowed. I don't know what I feel. And that was the most honest thing he'd said all night. 3 days. That's how long Malcolm lasted. 3 days of pretending that Gala hadn't cracked something open. 3 days of waking up next to Danielle, but dreaming about a black silk dress and a spotlight. 3 days of hearing Everett's voice echo, wealth without emotional intelligence is just expensive loneliness. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to go back to normal after life exposed you? It's like trying to smooth out a wrinkled suit with your hands. It might look decent from far away, but up close, the creases are still there. Malcolm stood in his kitchen staring at his espresso machine like it had betrayed him. The house was immaculate, modern, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, quiet. Too quiet. Danielle had already left for Pilates. She'd been quieter than usual since the gala. Polite, but distant. And distance feels different when you recognize it, because now he understood what Imani must have felt years ago. Not loud arguments, just absence. He checked his phone. 3 unread emails, 2 in Buster updates, 1 text from his assistant, and then a news alert. Dr. Imani Brooks secured record funding at Sterling Gala. He clicked it. There she was, photographed mid-laugh beside Everett. The caption read, Power couple leading education reform. Power couple. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Funny how the world labels things so quickly. But the real question burning in his chest wasn't about the article. It was about himself. Had he ever truly seen her as powerful, or only as supportive? Now listen, regret doesn't always show up as tears. Sometimes it shows up as impulse. Malcolm opened his contacts, scrolled, paused on her name. He hadn't deleted it. He never did. Just changed it from my wife, Hart, to Imani Brooks. That hurt more than he expected. He told himself he just wanted closure, just a conversation, just to clear the air. But let's be honest, he wanted reassurance. Reassurance that he hadn't lost something irreplaceable. So, he did it. He called. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Her voice, calm and professional, filled his ear. "You've reached Dr. Brooks. Please leave a message." Dr. Brooks. Not Imani. Not sweetheart. Not baby. Dr. Brooks. He hung up without speaking. Pride stopped him. For now. That evening, Danielle didn't turn on the television, didn't scroll her phone. She sat across from him at the dining table, hands folded, composed. "You called her today." It wasn't a question. It was fact. He blinked. "How did you—" "Your phone lit up while you were in the shower." Silence. Now, here's a pattern interrupt for you. If you're in a marriage where your spouse feels the need to check your phone, something is already broken. Danielle wasn't dramatic. She wasn't yelling. That made it worse. "I need to know what's happening, Malcolm." He leaned back in his chair. "I just wanted to congratulate her properly." That's what the gala was. Another silence. Thicker this time. Danielle inhaled slowly. "Are you trying to go back?" And there it was. The question he hadn't allowed himself to articulate. Was he? Or was he just mourning the version of himself he could have been? "I don't know," he admitted again. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. "You don't get to figure that out while married to me." That sentence landed clean, sharp, true. Now listen, Imani wasn't thinking about Malcolm in the way he feared. She was in a conference room reviewing grant allocations. Everett sat at the head of the table, listening as she outlined expansion plans. "Texas is next," she said confidently. "We'll need legislative allies." Everett nodded. Done. Not because he controlled everything, but because he believed in her direction. Now, let me ask you something. How different would your life feel if someone backed your vision without hesitation? That kind of partnership changes a person. After the meeting, Everett lingered. "You handled the gala aftermath beautifully." She smiled. "Years of practice?" He studied her gently. "You good?" She understood what he was really asking. About Malcolm. About the past. "Yes," she said honestly. And she meant it. Because closure doesn't require reconciliation. Sometimes it just requires growth. Malcolm didn't last another day. This time, he left a message. "Imani, it's me. I think we should talk. Not about anything specific, just talk." Vague, cowardly, safe. He hung up and immediately regretted it, because now the ball was in her court, and Malcolm wasn't used to not controlling outcomes. Hours passed. No reply. Evening came. Still nothing. And that silence? It felt intentional. That night, Malcolm couldn't sleep. His mind replayed an old memory, a smaller apartment, before the big house, before the investors. Imani sitting cross-legged on the floor eating takeout lo mein from the carton, laughing at something silly he said. No stress, no ego, just connection. He realized something painful. He missed who he was with her, not just her, but himself. The version of him that wasn't obsessed with scale. The man who used to listen, used to ask questions, used to hold her hand in public without worrying about perception. Somewhere along the way, ambition replaced intimacy, and he never noticed the trade. The next afternoon, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered quickly. Hello? A pause. Then, Hi, Malcolm. Her voice, steady, neutral. He stood up instinctively, as if posture mattered over the phone. Hey, another pause. You said you wanted to talk. Yes. He swallowed. Can we meet? Silence. Measured. Then, for what purpose? That question forced him to confront himself. He didn't have a clear answer. Closure? Apology? Rekindling? He didn't know. I owe you a conversation, he said finally. A long exhale on her end. Tomorrow. Public place. Professional. Boundaried. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Okay. After they hung up, his chest tightened, because now this was real. He told Danielle. That surprised her. I'm meeting her tomorrow. Danielle's face didn't change. Why? I need clarity. She stood slowly. And if your clarity costs me? That question hovered heavy between them. He didn't answer. And again, silence spoke. Danielle walked upstairs without another word, and Malcolm understood something terrifying. He might lose 2 women in the same year. One because he neglected her, and one because he couldn't let go. The next day arrived, heavy. Imani chose a quiet cafe downtown, neutral territory. She was already seated when he walked in. No silk dress this time, just tailored slacks and a cream blouse. Minimal makeup, maximum composure. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, she broke it. Say what you came to say. No small talk, no nostalgia buffer. He inhaled deeply. I didn't see you. Her expression didn't shift. I didn't understand how much you were carrying. I thought providing was enough. She nodded slowly. I know. That surprised him. You do? Yes. I don't think you were malicious. I think you were emotionally unequipped. Ouch. Accurate. But intention doesn't erase impact, she added softly. He looked down at his hands. I've been thinking about us. She tilted her head slightly. Why? Honest question. He hesitated. Because seeing you with him, it made me realize I lost something extraordinary. There it was. Raw, late. Imani held his gaze. Malcolm, you didn't lose me at the gala. He frowned slightly. You lost me at the kitchen island. The words hit, like truth usually does. Quiet, heavy, final. Let's go back to that cafe table. 2 cups of coffee, one past marriage sitting between them like a third guest, and a truth Malcolm wasn't ready to hear. Imani didn't blink when she said it. You lost me at the kitchen island. Not at the divorce papers, not at the gala, not at the kiss. At the moment she asked, do you still see me? And he chose comfort over courage. Now let me ask you something. How many relationships end long before they're legally over? Exactly. Malcolm cleared his throat. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Imani gave a small nod but didn't rescue him with encouragement. He had to say it himself. I made mistakes. I prioritized growth over intimacy. I thought success would fix what I neglected. She listened quietly. No interruption, no eye roll, just presence. I'm willing to do the work, he continued. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. If there's even a small chance. She lifted her hand gently. Not harsh, just firm. "Malcolm." He stopped mid-sentence. "I'm not your unfinished business." That line? That line could preach by itself. He stared at her. "I'm not something you circle back to once you realize you undervalued me," she continued calmly. "I'm not a lesson you retake because you failed the first time." The cafe noise faded into background static. He felt exposed. "I'm not asking you to rewind," he said quickly. I don't want this to be the end of our story." She studied him carefully. It already was. No cruelty, no bitterness, just fact. Now, here's where Malcolm expected her to defend Everett, to boast, to compare. She didn't. Instead, she leaned back and folded her hands. "You think this is about him." He swallowed. "Isn't it?" She shook her head slowly. "It's about me." Pause. "For the first time in my life, I chose someone who didn't need me to shrink." That landed deeper than jealousy ever could. Malcolm leaned forward. "So you love him?" Another calm nod. "Yes." Not rushed, not dramatic, secure. He looked away briefly, absorbing that. "And he loves you?" A faint smile touched her lips. "In a way that feels safe." Safe. That word used to belong to Malcolm, or at least he thought it did. But safety isn't about paying bills. It's about emotional consistency. Imanit hesitated for a moment, then added something unexpected. "When we divorced, I thought I had failed." Malcolm's eyes snapped back to her. "You?" "Yes. I kept asking myself what I could have done differently if I had been more patient, more understanding." He frowned. "You were patient?" She smiled softly. "I was silent." That distinction mattered. I confused endurance with loyalty. Now let that sit for a second. How many women were taught that lesson? Endure, don't complain, support him, and hope he notices. She continued. "I loved you deeply, but I abandoned myself in the process." Malcolm felt that like a mirror, because he had done the opposite. He had chosen himself at the expense of the marriage. Two extremes, same collapse. He leaned in slightly. "If I had answered you that night at the kitchen island, would we still be together?" That question trembled with genuine curiosity. She didn't answer immediately. She considered it. "Maybe," she said finally. His heart jumped. "But that's not the point." The jump dropped. "You didn't answer because you weren't ready to grow, and I wasn't ready to stop accepting less." There it was. Timing. It's not just about love, it's about readiness. Danielle sat alone in the living room that afternoon. Her phone rested on the coffee table. She had typed and deleted a message 3 times, not to Malcolm, to herself. She was thinking about the gala, about the way he stared at Imani, about the call logs. And here's the thing. Danielle wasn't naive. She married a successful man, but she hadn't signed up to compete with a ghost, or worse, a living memory. She whispered aloud to the empty room, "I won't beg to be chosen." Sound familiar? History has a way of repeating itself when lessons aren't learned. Malcolm exhaled slowly. "I don't want to disrupt your life." She raised one eyebrow slightly. "Then don't." Clear, direct, boundaried. "But I needed to apologize." "For what?" she asked calmly. "For not protecting what we had." She nodded once. "Thank you." And that was it. No tears, no emotional collapse, no dramatic reconciliation music playing in the background, just closure, the adult kind. As they stood to leave, something shifted. Everett walked in, not coincidental, intentional. He wasn't surprised to see Malcolm. He greeted him politely. "Good afternoon." Measured, secure. Malcolm nodded stiffly. Mr. Langston. Everett's eyes flicked briefly between them. Everything settled? Imani answered first. Yes. And the way she said it, final. Everett turned to Malcolm. I appreciate you meeting respectfully. There was no threat in his tone, but there was confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you're chosen. Malcolm felt small for the first time in years, not because Everett was richer, but because Everett was grounded. As Malcolm stepped onto the sidewalk alone, the air felt heavier. He had come hoping for possibility, he left with reality. And sometimes reality hurts worse because it's fair. His phone buzzed. Danielle. He stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before answering. Hey. Her voice was calm. Are you coming home? Home. Funny how that word feels different when you're unsure where it truly is. Yes, he said. A pause. We need to talk. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. That evening, they sat facing each other again. Déjà vu, but roles reversed. Danielle didn't yell, didn't accuse. She simply asked, Do you love her? This time, Malcolm didn't hide behind, I don't know. I love who I was with her, he admitted. Honesty, finally. Danielle absorbed that quietly. And do you love me? He hesitated, and that hesitation answered everything. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I deserve someone who doesn't hesitate. Yes, she did. And in that moment, Malcolm saw the pattern. He had once made Imani feel unseen. Now he was about to do the same to Danielle, history repeating itself in real time. Danielle stood. I won't stay in a marriage where I'm competing with growth you should have had years ago. No shouting, just dignity. She walked upstairs and began packing a suitcase. Malcolm didn't stop her. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew she was right. You can't heal one wound by reopening another.
This story might feel close to your own life. Please listen till the end and share your thoughts in the comments. For more real stories like this, consider subscribing.
Let me ask you something real before we step back into the story. Have you ever had the house all to yourself, and instead of peace, you felt exposed? Not quiet, exposed. Because silence doesn't distract you, it introduces you to yourself. That's where Malcolm found himself. Danielle didn't slam doors. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't demand explanations. She packed with dignity. That somehow hurt more. The zipper of her suitcase closing sounded final. I'll stay with my sister for a while, she said calmly. Malcolm nodded. He wanted to say something redemptive, something mature, something that would paint him as a man working through complexity. But no speech would erase hesitation, and she had seen it. The front door closed, and just like that, Malcolm was alone in a house built for display. Now, here's the irony. He once believed providing security was the same as creating safety, but safety isn't marble countertops and investment portfolios. Safety is emotional presence, and Malcolm had never mastered that. He poured himself a drink, then another, walked through the house like he was touring someone else's life. The art on the walls felt staged. The furniture looked expensive but unfamiliar. He sat in the dark living room and let the silence press against him. And here's where the mind starts replaying things you tried to forget. Imani's kitchen island question. Danielle's, I deserve someone who doesn't hesitate. Everett's calm confidence. For the first time in years, Malcolm didn't have noise to outrun reflection. And reflection? It doesn't negotiate. Imani stood on Everett's balcony overlooking the skyline. Atlanta shimmered beneath them. He handed her a glass of sparkling water. You okay? He asked softly. She smiled. I am. And she was, because closure feels lighter than revenge. Everett studied her gently. You don't owe anyone your emotional labor. She glanced at him sideways. You sure you're not a therapist disguised as a billionaire? He laughed. And let me pause right there, because laughter like that, that's ease, not tension disguised as passion. Ease. Everett didn't need to compete with Malcolm. He wasn't threatened. He understood something powerful. When someone chooses you freely, there's no insecurity attached. The next morning, Malcolm woke up with a headache. Not from alcohol, from truth. He stared at the ceiling and asked himself something he'd never asked before. Who am I without applause? Because so much of his identity was built around success, but success hadn't taught him how to sit in discomfort. He reached for his phone, scrolled through old photos, him and Imani at a community picnic, her hair natural and free, his arm wrapped around her waist. They looked young, hopeful, connected. He whispered out loud, I messed up. Now, that's growth, but growth after damage feels different. Around noon, his assistant called. Mr. Reed, you've received an invitation. For? He asked. For a private leadership summit hosted by Langston Enterprises. Malcolm froze. Everett, of course. He hesitated. Is this business? Yes, sir. Select founders only. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. This wasn't personal. It couldn't be. Or was it? Because timing can feel intentional. He confirmed attendance. Part pride, part curiosity, part unfinished ego. Later that evening, Everett mentioned the summit casually. Malcolm's attending. Imani didn't flinch. Okay. He watched her carefully. You comfortable with that? She nodded. I've already closed that chapter. That right there, that's healing. Not pretending someone doesn't exist, but knowing they no longer destabilize you. Everett respected that. Good, he said simply. No jealousy, no interrogation. Security looks different when it's earned. The Langston Leadership Summit wasn't flashy. It was intentional. 20 entrepreneurs, closed room, no press, no cameras. Everett stood at the front, not in a designer suit, but in something simpler, accessible, grounded. Malcolm took a seat near the back, observing, calculating. Everett began. Today isn't about scaling companies, it's about scaling character. That sentence alone shifted the temperature. Malcolm crossed his arms slightly. Defensive reflex. Everett continued. You can build empires and still fail at intimacy. No one reacted outwardly, but Malcolm felt seen or exposed. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. The workshop moved into small group discussions. One question landed heavy. What personal pattern has cost you the most? The room went quiet. Malcolm stared at the paper in front of him. His pen hovered. He wrote one word: avoidance. Avoidance of vulnerability. Avoidance of hard conversations. Avoidance of emotional growth. And the cost? 2 marriages. During a break, Everett approached him directly. Walk with me. Not confrontational, not friendly, just direct. They stepped into a quieter corridor. Everett didn't waste time. I respect what you built, he said. Malcolm nodded cautiously. Thank you. But I'm more interested in who you're becoming. That caught him off guard. Everett's gaze was steady. Imani loved you once. That tells me you're capable of depth. Malcolm blinked. This wasn't a threat. It was insight. But loving someone and being equipped for them are different things, Everett continued. The words weren't cruel. They were accurate. Malcolm swallowed. I didn't know how to show up. Everett nodded. Most men aren't taught. Now, here's a moment worth pausing on, because sometimes healing begins when another man speaks truth without ego. Everett wasn't claiming superiority. He was acknowledging evolution. She needed presence. Everett added softly. And I needed reflection, Malcolm admitted. They stood in silence for a moment. Not enemies, not friends, just two men connected by the same woman at different stages of readiness. After the summit, Malcolm didn't rush home. He drove aimlessly, thinking, processing. For the first time, he didn't feel jealousy. He felt responsibility. Imani wasn't stolen from him. She outgrew him, and growth can't be reversed by regret. He pulled over and called someone unexpected, a therapist recommended by one of the summit speakers. "Hi," he said when they answered. "I think I'm ready to unpack some things." Now listen, that phone call, that's the real turning point. Not the kiss, not the gala, not even the divorce. Accountability. That night, Imani sat alone for a moment, not because she was unsettled, but because reflection still matters even when you've healed. She thought about Malcolm, not romantically, historically. She whispered softly, "I forgive you." Not because he asked, but because holding resentment costs too much energy. Everett stepped into the room quietly. "You good?" She smiled. "Better than good." He kissed her forehead, and that kiss, it wasn't performative, it wasn't territorial, it was partnership. Now we're going somewhere Malcolm never wanted to go. Back. And let me tell you something. Most grown men can build skyscrapers before they build self-awareness. Therapy has a way of stripping titles. In that office, Malcolm wasn't a founder, wasn't a husband, wasn't a provider. He was just a boy who learned something early and never unlearned it. Dr. Harris didn't look impressed by Malcolm's resume. That alone unsettled him. "So," she began calmly, "what brings you here?" Malcolm adjusted in his seat. "My marriages ended because I wasn't emotionally present." She nodded. "And why do you think that is?" He opened his mouth, closed it. He had prepared business pitches more easily than this. "I focused on work." "That's behavior," she said gently. "I'm asking about belief." Belief. That word lingered. After a long pause, he said something he hadn't said out loud before. "I believe love is conditional." Dr. Harris didn't flinch. "Tell me where you learned that." And just like that, we're back in 1989. Two-bedroom apartment, south side of Chicago. His father worked double shifts. His mother worked exhaustion into her bones. There wasn't room for feelings. There was room for survival. Malcolm remembered bringing home a report card once. Straight A's. He was 10. He handed it to his father proudly. His father glanced at it and said, "Good, keep it up." No hug, no celebration, just expectation. Now let me ask you something. If the only time you're noticed is when you achieve, what do you learn? You learn achievement equals affection. You learn performance equals praise. You learn love must be earned. And Malcolm carried that lesson into adulthood like scripture. His household wasn't abusive. It was stoic, quiet, emotionally efficient. When Malcolm cried once after losing a basketball game, his father said, "Don't let feelings slow you down." So he didn't. He shut them down, locked them away, and replaced them with ambition, because ambition was safe. Ambition got approval. Ambition never asked, "Do you still see me?" Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "When Imani asked you if you still saw her, what did you feel?" Malcolm stared at the carpet. "Pressure." "Why?" "Because I thought she was asking for something I didn't know how to give." That right there, that's the wound. Not cruelty. Inadequacy. He didn't ignore her because he didn't love her. He ignored her because he didn't have the emotional vocabulary to respond. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "So you withdrew?" "Yes." "And with Danielle?" He exhaled slowly. I married admiration instead of compatibility. Honest. Painfully honest. Over the next few weeks, sessions peeled back layers. Malcolm began recognizing a pattern. When intimacy deepened, he retreated into work. When emotions intensified, he intellectualized. When women asked for connection, he offered solutions instead. And here's something that might hit home for a few folks listening. Providing financially is not the same as providing emotionally. One builds houses, the other builds home. Malcolm had mastered the first, avoided the second. Across town, Imani sat in her office after hours. She wasn't thinking about Malcolm constantly, but growth has a way of making you curious about your past. She journaled something that night. I loved a man who didn't know how to stay. Not because he wanted to leave, but because staying emotionally required skills he was never taught. She paused, then wrote, "And I stayed too long hoping love would teach him." That's a heavy realization. Loving someone doesn't automatically educate them. Growth is intentional. In one therapy session, Malcolm remembered something he hadn't thought about in years. He was 12. His mother had been hospitalized briefly. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough. He remembered sitting alone in the apartment for a few hours before his aunt arrived. No one explained what was happening. No one asked if he was scared. He felt invisible, helpless, and he made a silent promise to himself that day. I'll never need anyone that much. That promise shaped every relationship afterward. Needing someone felt dangerous, so when Imani needed reassurance, it triggered fear, and fear masqueraded as indifference. One afternoon, Malcolm admitted something difficult. I resented Everett. Dr. Harris tilted her head. For what? For being the man I should have been. She smiled gently. Or the man he had time to become. That shifted something. Everett wasn't better. He was further along emotionally. There's a difference. Comparison fades when accountability rises. Across town, Imani met Malcolm for coffee. Not reconciliation. Closure. She filed for separation, she said calmly. He nodded. I understand. She studied him carefully. You seem different. I'm trying to be. She nodded. I hope you are, for your sake. Not bitter, not cold, just resolved. Before she stood to leave, she added, don't use regret as motivation. Use awareness. That line stayed with him, because regret burns hot and fades fast. Awareness sustains change. One session, Dr. Harris asked, what would it look like to love without earning it? Malcolm sat quietly. He had no answer, because unconditional presence felt foreign. But he tried something radical that week. He called his father. They hadn't spoken deeply in years. Dad, he began awkwardly, did you ever feel like you had to earn love growing up? Long silence. Then a sigh. Son, my father never hugged me a day in my life. The generational echo was loud. Malcolm felt something crack open. This wasn't just about him. It was inherited silence, passed down like tradition. And in that moment, Malcolm understood something profound. He wasn't broken. He was patterned, and patterns can be rewritten. Everett proposed to Imani quietly, not at a gala, not with cameras, in her living room, after dinner. I want to build with you, he said simply. Not rescue, not elevate, build. She smiled. Yes. No hesitation, because this time love didn't feel like negotiation. It felt aligned. He found out about their engagement through a mutual colleague. He paused when he heard, not shocked, not shattered, just reflective. He sat with the feeling instead of numbing it. That was new. He whispered softly, I hope she's happy. And he meant it. Growth shows up when you can release without resentment. How do you know change is real? Is it when you cry in therapy? When you admit your childhood hurt? When you apologize? Or is it when life gives you the exact same trigger and you respond differently? Because growth is not proven in private, it's proven when pressure returns. And pressure was about to return, publicly. 3 months had passed since the gala. 3 months of therapy, 3 months of solitude, 3 months without Danielle. The house didn't feel as heavy anymore, not because he filled it with distractions, but because he stopped running from silence. One afternoon, his assistant stepped into his office. "Mr. Reed, you've been invited to keynote the National Innovation and Equity Conference." He glanced up. "Who's hosting?" She checked her tablet. "Langston Foundation." He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Langston. Of course. He took a slow breath. "When is it?" "Next month." He nodded. "Confirm." Not out of ego, not out of rivalry, out of readiness. Because avoiding rooms was the old Malcolm. Showing up was the new test. Across town, Imani sat at a long dining table covered in fabric swatches and guest lists. She didn't want extravagance. She wanted intention. Everett respected that. "Small," she insisted. "Intimate." He smiled. "You sure you don't want chandeliers and a gospel choir?" She laughed. "Don't tempt me." Their relationship wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on alignment. She hadn't thought about Malcolm in weeks. Not emotionally, only occasionally when a memory surfaced, and it no longer stung. That's how you know you've healed, when memories become history instead of wounds. The ballroom felt familiar, but different. Malcolm stood backstage adjusting his tie. He wasn't there as someone's ex-husband. He was there as a speaker. And for the first time in a long time, his focus wasn't on who was watching. It was on what he would say. Everett walked in first, polished, as always. Their eyes met. No tension, just acknowledgement. "Glad you came," Everett said calmly. "Thank you for the invite," Malcolm replied. Short, respectful. Then she walked in, Imani. Not in silk this time, in a structured navy suit. Professional, radiant. She smiled politely. "Congratulations on the keynote." "Thank you," he said sincerely. And here's the part that matters. His heart didn't race. His voice didn't tremble. He wasn't fighting regret. He was present. Growth doesn't erase history. It neutralizes it. When Malcolm stepped onto that stage, something shifted. He didn't open with company metrics. He didn't brag about valuation. He said this instead. "For years, I believed scaling a business mattered more than sustaining intimacy." The room went quiet. "I confused provision with presence." Imani's eyes flickered slightly, not with pain, with recognition. He continued, "I've learned that success without emotional intelligence will cost you relationships you can't repurchase." The audience leaned in. He wasn't preaching. He was confessing. He spoke about generational silence, about inherited stoicism, about the danger of tying love to performance. No names mentioned, but truth doesn't require specifics. And here's a pattern interrupt for you. When was the last time you heard a successful man publicly admit emotional failure? Exactly. That's why the room felt still. Because vulnerability from power hits differently. When he finished, the applause rose steadily. But it didn't feed his ego. It settled something in him. He stepped off stage and caught Everett's eye. Everett nodded once. Respect. Not rivalry. Imani approached next. "That was honest," she said quietly. "Thank you," he replied. No longing, no fishing for affirmation, just gratitude. "I'm proud of you," she added softly. Now listen carefully. That sentence could have undone him months ago. Today, it grounded him. "Thank you," he repeated, and meant it. Later that evening, during the networking reception, a young woman approached Malcolm, mid-30s, ambitious, polished. She complimented his speech, laughed at his small jokes, touched his arm lightly during conversation. Old Malcolm would have enjoyed the attention, maybe leaned in, maybe flirted subtly, but something inside him felt different, not superior, just aware. He didn't need admiration to validate himself anymore. He excused himself politely and walked away. Growth isn't dramatic. It's subtle choices repeated consistently. Before leaving, Everett asked Malcolm to step aside briefly. "You've done work," Everett said plainly. "I've started," Malcolm corrected. Everett nodded approvingly. Starting is rare. There was no tension between them, because competition only exists when insecurity does. "Imani is happy," Everett added. "I know," Malcolm said. And this time it didn't hurt. It felt right. As Malcolm exited the venue, he passed the kitchen catering area. For a split second, he remembered that old apartment kitchen. Low main curtains, shared laughter. He smiled softly. Not with ache, with appreciation. Because some love stories aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to grow you. And Imani had grown him, just not in the way he expected. Weeks later, Malcolm received something unexpected. An envelope, handwritten. Inside was a simple invitation. Imani and Everett's wedding. Small ceremony, limited guests. He stared at it for a long time. He wasn't obligated to attend. He could have declined quietly, avoided discomfort. But avoidance was the old pattern. So he RSVP'd yes. Not fake smile, not endure, not silently compare, but genuinely clap. That's the kind of maturity we're about to witness. Because the day of Imani and Everett's wedding arrived, and Malcolm showed up. It wasn't a ballroom. It wasn't dripping in spectacle. It was intentional. A private estate just outside the city. Soft cream florals. String quartet playing classic soul arrangements. Nothing flashy, just elegant. About 50 guests. Family, close friends, mentors. No press, no magazine spreads, just presence. Malcolm arrived alone. Simple charcoal suit, no dramatic entrance. He wasn't there to prove anything. He was there to honor something. And Matt matters. He saw her before he saw him. Imani stood beneath a canopy of ivory roses, speaking quietly with her bridesmaids. Her gown wasn't over the top. It was structured, timeless, regal. She looked grounded, not nervous, not performative, peaceful. And here's the thing that surprised Malcolm the most. His chest didn't tighten. His hands didn't shake. There was no inner spiral of what if. Instead, he felt something softer, gratitude. Because loving someone once doesn't obligate you to possess them forever. Sometimes love is seasonal, and that's okay. One of Imani's friends spotted Malcolm and paused briefly. Recognition, curiosity, but no hostility. That chapter had closed with dignity. Imani turned eventually. Their eyes met across the garden. For a split second, history flickered between them. Not romantic, not painful, just shared. She smiled, not wide, just warm. He nodded slightly. A silent exchange. We survived what we were. And then she turned back toward her future. That right there, that's closure in motion. Everett stood at the altar, calm, centered. He didn't look anxious. He looked certain. When Imani began walking down the aisle, something shifted in the air. not because she was someone's ex-wife, but because she was stepping into alignment. Malcolm watched quietly. And let me interrupt the story for just a second. How many of us stay emotionally tethered to people who have already grown beyond the version of us they knew? Growth can be painful to witness, but it's also beautiful. Back to the aisle. Everett's eyes didn't leave her, not scanning the crowd, not distracted, locked in. That kind of focus speaks volumes. They didn't write theatrical vows. They spoke intentionally. Everett first. I promise to stand with you, not above you, to protect your brilliance, not compete with it, to listen when you speak and stay when things get uncomfortable. Stay when things get uncomfortable. Malcolm felt that line land, because leaving emotionally had been his reflex. Then Imani spoke. I promise to remain whole inside this marriage, to love you without shrinking, to build with you, not behind you. Not behind you. That one could preach for days. The vows weren't about perfection. They were about awareness. When they kissed, soft, assured, the applause rose naturally, and Malcolm clapped. Not because it was polite, but because it was honest. And honesty feels lighter than ego. During cocktail hour, Malcolm stood near the edge of the garden sipping sparkling water. No alcohol today. He wanted clarity. A few mutual acquaintances approached him. They expected awkwardness. They didn't find it. He spoke respectfully, warmly, no bitterness hiding beneath charm. That's how you know change isn't temporary. It's integrated. Midway through the reception, Everett approached him. Thank you for coming. Simple. Malcolm nodded. It mattered. Everett studied him briefly. You're different. Malcolm smiled faintly. I had to be. There was no tension between them, because rivalry requires unresolved ego, and Malcolm wasn't carrying that anymore. Later, Imani stepped aside briefly to greet him. Not long, just enough. I appreciate you being here, she said. I'm glad I came. And here's what made the moment powerful. He didn't apologize again. He didn't reopen history. He didn't try to reclaim narrative. He simply said, You look happy. I am, she replied. And for the first time, that truth didn't threaten him. It affirmed him, because her happiness wasn't proof of his failure. It was proof that growth works, even if it happens separately. Now, pause for a second. Imagine sitting at your ex's wedding reception while a quartet plays Ribbon in the Sky softly in the background. You've got a slice of cake in your hand, and instead of spiraling, you're reflecting. That's growth, baby. That's emotional muscle built over time. Okay, back to the story. Near the end of the evening, the microphone passed to close friends and family. Unexpectedly, Everett called Malcolm forward. A ripple moved through the crowd. Imani was surprised. Malcolm blinked once, but he stood, because running was no longer his instinct. He took the microphone, paused, looked at them both, then said something simple. Imani and I shared years that shaped us both. I learned from her. More than I understood at the time. Soft murmurs. He continued. She deserves a love that sees her fully, and I'm grateful she found it. No drama, no tears, just truth. The room felt still. He handed the microphone back and stepped down, and something invisible lifted, because when you release someone publicly with respect, you release yourself privately too. As the evening wound down, Malcolm walked toward the exit quietly. No lingering, no emotional collapse, just peace. He took one last look at the celebration behind him, then stepped into the cool night air alone. But not lonely. That's a different kind of strength. On the drive back, he didn't replay regrets. He replayed lessons. He thought about his father, about generational silence, about the boy who believed love had to be earned. He whispered something softly to himself. I don't have to perform to be worthy. That sentence right there, that's breakthrough. What happens after the lesson? Not the heartbreak, not the public moment, not the apology. After the dust settles, who are you? Because growth is beautiful, but eventually life asks, okay, now live it. And Malcolm was about to find out whether his transformation could survive something new, not familiar, not nostalgic, new. The house felt different now, not because someone filled it, but because Malcolm did. He had changed small things first, rearranged furniture, added warmth, photos, not just awards, lined the hallway. He even framed a picture from years ago, not of Imani, but of himself at 12, holding that straight A report card. A reminder, that boy deserved love without performance. Therapy continued, not weekly anymore, bi-weekly, intentional maintenance, because healing isn't a one-time event, it's upkeep. One evening, Malcolm agreed to sit on a community discussion panel. Topic: Redefining masculinity in leadership. Old Malcolm would have declined, too vulnerable, too personal. New Malcolm said yes. The event was smaller than the gala. Local university auditorium, mixed crowd, young professionals, older couples, some people skeptical, some curious. He sat alongside two other speakers and one moderator. Her name was Adrienne Cole, mid-40s, sharp mind, warm presence. No flash, no over-polish, grounded. Now, don't rush. This isn't a fairy tale entrance. It's something quieter, which makes it more powerful. Adrienne didn't treat Malcolm like a celebrity. She treated him like a participant. When he shared parts of his story about emotional avoidance and inherited silence, she didn't praise him excessively. She asked follow-up questions, challenging ones. When did you realize apology wasn't enough? She asked calmly. The audience leaned in. Malcolm paused. When I understood that remorse doesn't rebuild trust, consistency does. She nodded thoughtfully. And how are you practicing consistency? That question landed differently because she wasn't impressed by the breakthrough. She was curious about the behavior. He liked that. Not admiration, accountability. After the event, people gathered in small groups. Adrienne packed her notes neatly. No rush. Malcolm approached her. You ask direct questions. She smiled slightly. I prefer clarity. That's rare, he replied. So is public vulnerability from men in power. Touché. He laughed softly. Now here's the subtle shift. There was no immediate spark, no dramatic chemistry, just mutual respect. And sometimes that's healthier. As they walked toward the exit, she mentioned something casually. I host a monthly discussion group, small circle, professionals unpacking emotional intelligence in leadership. He raised an eyebrow. That sounds intense. It is, she replied. No ego allowed. He paused. Old Malcolm might have felt threatened. New Malcolm felt intrigued. When's the next one? She handed him a simple card. Next Thursday. No flirtation, no performance, just invitation. The following week, Malcolm showed up. No fanfare, 10 chairs arranged in a circle. No stage, no hierarchy. Adrienne facilitated, gently. One by one, people shared experiences of emotional blind spots in relationships and careers. When it came to Malcolm, he didn't give a speech. He shared something simple. I used to believe love was earned through achievement. I'm still unlearning that. Silence. Not judgment. Reflection. Adrienne watched him carefully. not impressed, not skeptical, observing. That steadiness felt different, not like admiration, like evaluation. And strangely, he respected it. After the group dispersed, Adrian lingered. "You're not defensive," she said. "I've been defensive most of my life," he admitted. "It's exhausting." She smiled faintly. Self-awareness can be. They walked out together. The night air was cool, comfortable silence, not awkward, just present. Then she asked something unexpected. "What are you afraid of now?" Not what he achieved, not who he dated. Fear. He didn't dodge it. "I'm afraid of repeating myself." She nodded slowly. "That's a healthy fear, if it leads to conscious choices." That sentence lingered. Healthy fear, not avoidance, awareness. A few weeks later, they met for coffee, not labeled as a date, just conversation. Adrian wasn't dazzled by his resume. She asked about therapy, about his father, about what he's doing differently when discomfort arises. At one point, she said, "I don't need perfection, I need presence." That sentence echoed something familiar, but this time it didn't trigger panic. It triggered intention. "I can offer presence," he replied calmly, not defensively, not promising the moon, just grounded. Now pause for a second. Imagine being in your late 40s or 50s, sitting across from someone new, and instead of trying to impress them, you're trying to show up honestly. That's not flashy romance. That's grown love. Okay, back to the story. Weeks turned into months. No rush, no intensity spikes, just steady connection. Then one evening, Adrian expressed something vulnerable. "I've been married before," she said quietly, "and I won't re-enter something that requires me to shrink." Malcolm felt the weight of that. This was familiar territory. Different woman, different timing, different version of him. Old Malcolm would have reassured quickly, promised emotionally grand things. New Malcolm paused thoughtfully. "I don't want you to shrink, and if I ever make you feel that way, I expect you to tell me." Accountability, invited, that's different. She studied him carefully. "You won't retreat?" "I might feel the urge," he admitted honestly, "but I won't disappear." That answer wasn't polished, it was real, and real builds trust slowly. One afternoon, Malcolm received a message, a photo, from a mutual acquaintance. Imani and Everett at a policy event in D.C. Smiling, aligned, powerful. He looked at it for a moment. No jealousy, no ache, just acknowledgement. He whispered softly, "I'm glad," and meant it. Because closure isn't about forgetting someone, it's about no longer needing them to validate your growth. A month later, Malcolm and Adrian had their first real disagreement. Not dramatic, but meaningful. He canceled dinner last minute due to a work emergency. Old pattern creeping in. She didn't explode. She simply said, "I need to know I won't always come second." That could have triggered defensiveness. Instead, he paused. "You're right. I default to work when I'm stressed. That's not fair to you." No excuses, no blame. He rescheduled, showed up, on time, present. Small correction, big difference. Growth isn't perfection, it's repair. Let me ask you one last question before we close this story. What if the real victory isn't getting the girl back, or finding someone new, or proving you've changed? What if the real victory is breaking the pattern so the next generation doesn't have to? Because that's where we're headed now. Not to another wedding, not to another gala, but to a living room on the south side of Chicago. Malcolm hadn't been home in a while. Not the Atlanta house, the original one, the two-bedroom apartment building where everything started. His father still lived nearby in a modest condo, older now, slower, quieter, but still stoic. Malcolm stood outside the door for a moment before knocking, because this conversation, this one, mattered more than any speech he'd given. The door opened. "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad." They hugged, brief, slightly awkward, men who weren't raised with long embraces. They sat at the small kitchen table. Funny how life circles back to kitchen tables. For a while, they talked about surface things: weather, work, blood pressure medication. Then Malcolm cleared his throat. "Dad, can I ask you something real?" His father looked up slowly. "Go ahead." "Did you ever feel like you had to earn love growing up?" Silence. Long. Heavy. His father leaned back in his chair. "My father didn't say 'I love you' until I was 35. Malcolm blinked. 35? Yep, and I didn't know what to do with it when he said it. That landed deep, because suddenly this wasn't about Malcolm's marriages, it was about inheritance, emotional inheritance. His father continued quietly. "We were taught to survive, not express. There it was, survival over softness, provision over presence, performance over vulnerability." Malcolm took a breath. "I thought if I achieved enough, I'd never lose love." His father looked at him carefully. "Who told you that?" "No one. I just learned it." His father nodded slowly. "I probably showed you that. Not defensive, just honest. That right there, that's generational accountability." Malcolm swallowed hard. "I lost my first marriage because I didn't know how to stay emotionally." His father's eyes softened slightly. "I lost your mother for a while, too," he admitted quietly. Malcolm froze. "You did?" "She almost left. Said I was there, but not there." The pattern, clear as day. And here's the thing about patterns. They don't make you weak. They make you predictable until you confront them. Malcolm leaned forward. "I don't want to pass that down." His father studied him. "You planning on kids?" "Maybe," said Malcolm thoughtfully. "But even if I don't, I mentor young founders. I don't want them thinking stoicism is strength." His father exhaled slowly. "You're further along than I ever was." That wasn't envy, it was pride. And Malcolm realized something profound in that moment. Healing doesn't dishonor your parents, it frees them too. As Malcolm stood to leave, he hesitated, then did something neither of them were used to. He hugged his father longer than normal. Not awkward, intentional. "I love you, Dad." Silence. Then a firm squeeze in return. "Love you too, son." No performance, no achievement attached, just love, freely given. And that right there, that was the real breakthrough. Months passed. Malcolm's relationship with Adrian deepened slowly. No rushing, no fantasy, just consistency. One evening, she hosted another leadership circle. This time, Malcolm co-facilitated. The topic? Emotional presence as legacy. He shared openly, not about Imani specifically, but about what he learned. "I used to think success meant being untouchable," he told the group. "Now I know strength is staying in the uncomfortable conversation." Heads nodded. Young men listened closely. Older men shifted in their seats, because vulnerability still feels foreign to many. Adrian watched him quietly. Not impressed, not surprised, just aligned. After the session, she squeezed his hand lightly. "You stayed." 3 simple words, but they meant everything. Across the country, Imani stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. Everett sat in the front row, proud, present. She spoke about educational equity, about breaking cycles, about investing in young Black girls who were told to shrink. Her voice steady, her presence powerful. At one point she said, "When we heal ourselves, we interrupt generational silence." The audience applauded, and somewhere in Atlanta, Malcolm felt that truth without even hearing the speech. Because healing isn't owned, it ripples. 1 year after the gala, the night of the kiss, another event took place. Different cause, different room. Malcolm attended with Adrian. Imani attended with Everett. The 4 of them stood in the same space again. But this time, no tension, no unfinished energy, just adulthood. They greeted one another politely, respectfully, aligned in their separate lives. And that's when it became clear. The kiss that once froze Malcolm wasn't humiliation, it was revelation. It revealed what he lacked. It revealed what she deserved. It revealed what he needed to confront. Without that moment, he might still be performing love instead of practicing it. Let me ask you something. How many of us have been Malcolm at some point? How many of us have been Imani? How many have been Danielle, asking not to hesitate? And how many are still sitting at that kitchen island, hoping to be seen? This story isn't about billionaires or galas or dramatic kisses. It's about emotional neglect, silence, and late regret. But here's the good news. Late doesn't mean never. Malcolm didn't get his first marriage back. He didn't undo the damage, but he stopped repeating it. And sometimes that's the redemption. One quiet evening, Malcolm sat on his back porch with Adrian. No phones, no deadlines, just conversation. He listened as she spoke about her day, not half listening, not waiting to respond, listening, present. She noticed, smiled. "You're here." He nodded softly. "I am." No performance, no applause, no audience. Just presence. And that, my friends, is the kind of love that doesn't freeze under pressure. It grows. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of a kitchen island moment you never answered or a silence you inherited, take this as your sign. Have the conversation. Stay in the discomfort. Choose presence over pride. Because emotional intelligence isn't about being perfect, it's about being willing. And sometimes, a kiss that freezes you is the wake-up call that saves you.
If you're still listening, it means this story touched you. Please subscribe. Your support truly matters.